Welcome to today to a phenomenal conversation with John Oliver, covering the topics of art, complexity, and psychological development. And but before we go into that in depth with John, I'm so grateful you've come to join. And
Thank
I
you.
want to explain a little bit about phenomenal conversations. So, phenomenal conversations, if you've not listened to any of these interviews before, I interview change makers that are living the change. We try to amplify meaning in the midst of the poly crisis. We try to expand imagination in a chaotic world and try to ask profound questions. And we have two formats. One today, which is a one-on-one format where I interview said change makers. But there's also a live format, which is now tending to be about every 3 months, where we bring together groups to discuss the issues raised by the change makers, and we create a kind of collective body of wisdom from everybody in the room together with the change maker. And the next one will be next year, probably in January or February. And additionally, if you find this interview valuable, you think it's worth spreading, do please help me by sharing the work, by commenting, liking, and subscribing, whether you're on video or the audio channels. So thanks for that. Welcome to John. And as anybody that listens knows, I don't do a biography. I invite the change makers to give a little potted synopsis of what they feel is relevant to today's conversation in their own background. So thanks so much for coming, John. Really excited about this topic and love to hear, listeners would love to hear a little bit more about you and how you're coming into those three areas.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Dave. And yes, we've known each other for over 20 years, so this is a wonderful reconnection. And yes, I mean, my journey, I guess 20 years ago when we met, I mean, that's what one major milestone, which was my being very influenced by the Integral and Cam Wilber community.
Yeah.
And prior to that, I had trained in aerospace. I was sort of in industry, but read Small is Beautiful by E.F. Schumacher.
Yeah.
And it still is incredibly relevant for me today, the philosophy of the economics. And I worked for the NGO that E.F. Schumacher started for 4 years and worked in Nepal and Ghana. And so that was my sort of exiting, let's say, the sort of the rational engineering scientific area to really dive deep into the social sciences. So that was a very formative experience working in Nepal and in Ghana on projects and seeing the interaction between, yes, the anthropological insights of social change and the social scientists. And there was anthropologists on our teams, and there were projects which were technology transfer. And then I did an MBA, and it was at the MBA that somebody said, you should read Ken Wilber. I was trying to write a book at the time, actually just after my MBA, and somebody said, actually, by the way that I seem to be diving into, again, the sort of social sciences of anthropology of organizational development.
Oh, okay.
Somebody said, you need to read Ken Wilber. And so I've really been, yes, I guess, on a journey since, which is in some ways, ironically, to unlearn integral theory and to actually go back to one of my mentors in my MBA, one of our lecturers, who was Dave Snowden.
Snowden, yeah.
That's 25 years ago, Dave Snowden was an MBA lecturer. And so his critical thinking and his complexity principles were extremely meaningful. So I've been on a journey in actually working in organizational development, mainly through the narratives side of complexity practices. But in parallel, still with the influence and heritage of Ken Wilber, I certified in a developmental psychology coaching platform, Lectica. And so I've been, yes, working in developmental psychology and organizational development, but I guess sort of packaged more in a complexity approach. And then with COVID, I realized I needed a significant step on my own developmental journey.
You're right.
and might go into the sort of the nuances of that. But fundamentally, it was my feeling that I needed to undo my identity, my professional identity,
Yeah.
and lean into art. And so for the last 5 years, I've been really committing to a range of artistic practices,
Right.
but still very much keeping in mind the themes of complexity and developmental psychology. Yeah.
Great. So that almost in the last line brings together the kind of key themes for the podcast. Let's just explore, why do you think art and developmental psychology need each other? Why would they make happy or interesting bedfellows, as it were?
Yes, I think the polarity between how we understand things by looking at the parts
Yeah.
compared to a term which I came across through a very obscure book called um, it's by Anton Ehrenreich, called The Hidden Order of Art. But
Okay.
actually, the book speaks to something called syncretic thinking,
Yeah.
where you're really looking at the whole. And obviously, Dave Snowden, complexity science is all about observing and engaging with the system as a whole.
Yeah.
But I found that the art analogy was so critical because it's like you can't think your way into the whole.
Right.
And I felt that my own developmental journey is that something I couldn't it wasn't an intellectual pursuit.
Yeah.
It had to be something different. So developmental psychology obviously has been absolutely fascinating, even in terms of the way that it gets applied into moral development or um, uh, dimensions of faith that
Yeah.
people relate to, and the way that they make meaning of their life, and that there are fascinating patterns in the way that people construct their meaning in various domains. So yes, we're looking at parts, we're looking at thresholds, we're looking at sort of distinct clusters of patterns of meaning making. But it felt that this could be really related to in new ways for me personally, in that art is the aesthetic whole, which is a sort of full emotional, non-verbal feeling
Yeah.
that was a necessary partner in to not completely reject. And again, we'll maybe cycle through this a few times in our conversation, but it just felt that I was already personally kind of reaching the limits of my intellectual investigation into developmental psychology. And
Yeah.
obviously, there's various schools in developmental psychology, and there are various debates in developmental psychology, even between practitioners and researchers, which
Yeah.
kind of really going into the sort of forensics of developmental psychology.
Yeah.
And I tried to sort of keep up with that to a certain extent, but then I could feel sort of the law of diminishing returns, that
Yeah.
I wasn't
Yeah.
going to be able to contribute to
Yeah.
the real minutiae of developmental psychology research, but that actually an insight would come from the polar opposite of that, which was art, feeling the whole. And so, yeah, it's a very long answer to say that I feel that it's really a quest for the sort of a reductionist analytical side needs to
Mm.
be held alongside the
Right.
syncretic holding of the whole, and
Right.
it being a more aesthetic endeavor. So yeah,
So
I mean, there's
just
lots more to
go.
say about that, but
Let's just pick up on something you said there that I think is interesting, around paying attention to the whole, art paying attention to the whole, because one of my kind of intuitive critiques, I would say, of developmental psychology and most psychology, it's all about the part, and it's almost very little about the relationships to the whole or to each other. Maybe one measures one's level of development in relationship to others, but there seems to be an exclusive focus on the part, and then somehow it doesn't acknowledge enough the deep sort of relationality of all of existence. So would you care to comment on that, John?
yes, well, in fact, yeah, there's sort of flashes of how I was trying to communicate that in an art installation that I did with
Yeah.
the partnership with Jennifer Garvey-Berger in
Yeah.
Milan earlier
Yeah.
this year, so in
Yeah.
July. And that was a real privilege because I really felt that that was an opportunity. I've been contributing to a conference run by an Italian consultancy called People Rise, and
Yeah.
this is my second art um, project with them.
Yeah.
And Jennifer came as a keynote speaker, and the yes, hopefully I'll be responding to your question in terms of just a quick description of this art installation,
Yeah.
which
Okay.
was that there were a set of 5 panels on the floor, which were made up of symbols of a triangle, a square, a circle, and so forth. But the colors in presenting these symbols was actually a real mix of a rainbow of colors that I was scraping. I was using a Gerhard Richter kind of scraping of multiple colors to draw out these symbols.
Yeah.
And then there were vertical panels next to each of the panels which were on the floor,
Yeah.
which were more a distillation. And actually, these vertical panels were taking the primary colors of red, green, and blue. And they were, though, rotating, that one of the vertical panels would have more red, but then there'd be emerging green, and then there'd be a red coming from a smaller corner. And what I wanted to represent was even yet more transitions to then the vertical panels were being held by picture frames that I'd made myself, but these picture frames were just single color.
Right.
And then these picture frames of single colors was what I used to suspend a QR code to some of the portraits I've done with Jennifer.
Right.
So I wanted to represent the dimension of narrative.
Yeah.
And the overall ambition was to show that there is ultimately this messiness of colors that are intermixed. And yes, we can sort of point out a primary color to say that's blue and that's green,
Yeah.
but they're coming from a ground which is just by definition emerging and mixed and fractal.
Yeah.
And there's another word to sort of, yes, that sort of dynamic embedded nature. But it doesn't make pointing out that there are individual colors in there. It doesn't make that exercise wrong in saying that there's a
Right.
bit of blue, there's a bit of green.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is messy. I guess that's what I was wanting to show was
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
messiness.
Yeah.
But that we could, though, also integrate because these 5 panels on the floor were primary symbols, which were, again, a sort of a choice of lens that we can look at how is one showing up in the way that we relate to others, or
Yeah.
how are we showing up? This is where Jennifer's book, latest edition of her book, Changing on the Job, does a really nice job of um, distilling to just the right level of simplicity, the developmental psychology
Yeah.
forms of mind,
Yeah.
as she calls them, and also frames of mind.
Frames of mind. Okay.
And the yes, the invitation is to hold a greater picture rather than just going from a vertical table, a vertical listing.
Yeah.
How can we look at these things in more 3 dimension
Right.
and more sophisticated representation? So that's a very indirect way of answering your question, but please.
Yeah. I think
Point
so.
out.
Let me see if I've understood you
Mm,
correctly. That you and might be putting words in your mouth, but you were trying to represent and symbolize a kind of conventional way, or you could say the empirical way of seeing objects
mm,
and emphasizing their connection and relationship through the installation. And then how did if I've got that right, where does the Jennifer interviews, how did she illustrate the frames of mind then? So it's not that you've negated the value, but you've tried to weave in the value of particular perspectives, frames of mind, altitudes of consciousness or whatever. You've tried to symbolize them, and then you use Jennifer to illustrate it, or I mean, or correct me
Yes.
where I'm wrong, because
Yeah, no, you're
it's
spot
hard to
on. Yeah.
visualize. It's hard to
It,
visualize.
yes, it is. Yes, I will be actually publishing a post this week on LinkedIn with the summary and the photos of
Okay.
the installation. And
Yeah.
so, no, you're spot on that. In fact, sorry, to correct myself again, it is forms of mind that she uses in her book.
Forms of mind. Yeah.
But there was a little bit of kind of exploration of the terms because using these frames, physical frames,
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
hold the panels up. And yeah, Jennifer's narrative. So I filmed Jennifer twice, and
Yeah.
there were lots of amazing moments.
Yeah.
And so I was
Yeah.
picking out moments, and I forgot to mention this, that each of the primary colors are associating to a particular form of mind.
Okay. Right.
And so there were particular extracts of the
Right.
film portraits that I did with Jennifer that spoke to one of these forms of mind.
Right.
And so, if you sort of mean, there's sort of a bit of a cycle of the mix of colors with symbolic differentiation to say these are the different views of how we can even measure. And I will use that word that, even in art,
Yeah. Yeah.
there are useful notions of measurement. So um, we can look at somebody in terms of, yes, of their how they show up in a moral sense, how do they show up in a interpersonal sense, and what are their own personal goals. These are the different viewpoints of how somebody is showing up,
Yeah.
and they're going from the messy colors to distilling the primary colors to then selecting out one color to represent a form of mind. I was then showing the narratives from Jennifer to sort of cycle it back to that the messiness is held by coming back to stories and narratives.
Right.
So it's I think an essential cornerstone of meaning making by accessing and also leaning into complexity by leaning into narrative.
Okay. Well, I think that gives us a nice little bridge to the second topic that that I think you've a phrase that you've coined as a result of the exploration of art, developmental uh, psychology, and complexity science or complexity approaches. You came up with the notion of developmental sense making. So,
Mm.
could you explain what you mean by that to the uninitiated? That a little bit of a context, and then what it's different or why you feel it's important in relationship to this whole topic.
Yes. Well, the major influences that I've had in complexity are the likes of Dave Snowden and Nora Bateson,
Yeah, yeah,
and they hold a justifiably critical view of developmental psychology
yeah,
and these distilled stages and labels.
yeah,
And it really, so my term developmental sense making is an integration of these two domains. And obviously, one of the practice aspects of sense making and Dave Snowden's approach, and also Cynthia Kurtz, who was with Dave Snowden at IBM at the same time,
right,
and they both collaborated on synchronizing their own models of mapping complexity, the domains of complexity. They had their axes different directions, but they realized they were actually looking at the same thing in the way that systems are more or less centralized and the way that systems are more or less self-organized.
right,
And so Cynthia Kurtz has also really leaned into narratives, and so she's written some amazing work on participative narrative inquiry. And Dave Snowden has his own methodologies for rolling out and offering sense-making tools. But one major part of these sense-making tools is that the narrator actually is also the coder of their own narratives. So obviously, this is a generational challenge of how do anthropologists and social sciences uh, access quantitative information from the qualitative narrative content. And so both Cynthia and Dave were looking at how actually you can turn the tables and actually get the participant to code themselves their narrative. And actually, it's a developmental. We saw some really fascinating moments of insight as to, even at an organizational development level, replacing surveys by storytelling. But then having the storyteller code their own narrative gives you layers of insight actually that weren't necessarily in the actual raw original narrative.
So would that be like be as minute or small as like keywords, or is it?
Yes, so there's a number of ways. Exactly, there's a number of ways.
What you might, if you're on the web, you search on keywords, or you can search a podcast on keywords. Is that sort of what you're getting at?
Well, actually, it goes a step further than just tagging with keywords. It's actually getting the participants to label their narrative based on a number of. Now, there's a word for it, even in survey technologies, which is the trade-off analysis.
Okay.
And there's another word in survey design. Will hopefully come back to me, but you're basically asking the participant to slide a cursor on, is your narrative more about this or is it more about that?
Okay.
So you're accessing also one of the sort of core principles that complexity is about a continuous negotiation of necessary tensions. And are you going to be a very agentic leader, taking risks and going out there, or are you somebody who's going to be more collaborative and listening and working with the collective? And there are moments where each of those dimensions are absolutely necessary and are positive. So you're more asking the participant to weight these various dynamics. And so you have a series of sliding scales, really. And or triads. So Dave Snowden used a lot of triads in these trade-off analysis. And what developmental sense making I offer is, and we did do this in some of our client projects, was actually to use the developmental stage definition as the interpretation framework for people to reflect on their own narrative. So that it actually remains a first-person exercise. It's not an external coder who's looking at your narrative and saying, oh, you are showing up in this particular stage. But actually the developmental distinctions are more of a grammar that are offered to people to make sense of how they're showing up.
So, I mean, in the paper I read about you, you seem to imply, and I might have read it wrong, but you seem to imply this is a necessary next step in the overlap between the kind of fields of complexity and developmental psychology. Am I right?
Yes, exactly. Yes. And the one way of looking at it that I offer in a paper that I have published on, a summary of which I published on, is the coming back to the transcendentals of the first, second, and third person, the good, the true, and the beautiful. And so the science, arts, and the religion or faith, and that the developmental psychology is based on scientific principles of observation and collecting data to identify patterns. And yes, these can be used in obviously very blunt ways, but
that's what turned me off the integrals thing.
Right, yes.
The kind of lazy categorization of something somebody said. It's just,
Right. Yes.
through these developmental lenses, but it's a kind of abuse of the whole process.
Yes. Yes. And what I feel is that just that there's sort of the vitality of going through the transcendentals has been lost because it's as if we get stuck on the third person to
Yeah.
say that this is locked in stone or this is going to be a sort of an ultimate measure,
Yeah. Yeah.
but not to throw the quest of some um, yes, again coming back to sense making, that we need some scaffolding
Yeah.
in our sense making, and
Yeah.
that the third person is should be a vital dimension of how we come together, as
Yeah. Yeah.
society, and that I would like to propose that developmental sense making is a more sort of vitalistic movement between first, second, and third person,
Yeah.
of which in the third person there are various scaffolding grammatical supports, such as
Yeah.
from the developmental psychology frameworks. And it's just that, it might have got stuck in third person and then gets exaggerated in third person to take this as
Yeah.
gospel.
Yeah.
And then the debate from Laura and Dave is very, what would be the word now, sort of um, uh, throws quite a lot of sparks into the works in a good way to sort of shake it up and to call out
Yeah.
the counterfactuals of these frameworks.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping to kind of reconcile to say that actually, if we look at the transcendentals, so science and art and
Yeah.
faith as a whole, actually as an ontological whole,
Yeah.
which wasn't always so clear in the integral community as to how the four quadrants could be seen as an actual codependent whole,
Yeah.
which maybe I'll come back to. But yeah, I
Yeah.
hope
Well,
that answers
that's a
your.
slight irony of it being integral.
Yes,
But,
well, funny enough, isn't
yeah,
that? Yes, it's true. Yes.
yes. So if we go, I mean, you've mentioned it, and I did have it as a question. I'd love you to elucidate a bit more about the good, the true, and the beautiful, because, of course, in terms of the question order, this is probably central to developmental sense making. I also think it's a useful and original contribution of thought from you. But for
Mm,
the un uninitiated integralist, could you
mm.
give us some background to those three perspectives and ways of seeing the world and what they mean, and then go on to uh, articulate what value they think this way of seeing and thinking and believing and knowing adds to what we've talked about so far,
Mm.
especially, and maybe we'll go on to talk about art within that
Yes.
as well. We'll go next on to art once if you haven't forgotten the question already, but
Yeah, I think I'm there, but maybe
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
you would be
I'll
welcome to
prompt
jump
you
in to
if
remind me, please.
yeah, yeah,
Yes. Well, fun enough, actually, if I could just make a kind of historical step back and
yeah,
also some interesting dynamic from my family and even in my own identity, growing up very young, being fortunate to have parents who were very sympathetic to the arts,
yeah,
and even though I went down a science background, I was surrounded by poetry and classical music and a real interest in the arts. And from my mother's side of the family,
yeah.
her grandfather was a pre-Raphaelite painter
Oh,
called,
really?
called John Brett.
Oh, okay.
And so he was interacting with the kind of key figures of the Raphaelite Brotherhood. And we
Right.
just actually gave all of his letters to the Tate Britain
Wow.
archives because of his conversations with poets and the other
Yeah,
painters of
yeah.
the time. And what is amazing, oh, I mean, funny enough, by the way, so we're a family of seven. I'm the youngest of seven.
Right.
And the one family heirloom inheritance that I have is a bronze sculpture of my great grandfather, the
Okay.
painter.
Yeah.
So he's sort of ever present with me here.
Okay.
And if you Google the good, the true, and the beautiful,
Yeah.
bizarrely, like first or second Google hit. This was now a few years ago, and I have to double check if it's still there. Is an article from the Tate Britain on the looking at the transcendentals at the time of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood,
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
because they were sort of a representative community of the digestion of Darwin at the time.
Mm.
And my own great 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 grandfather, who was Christian and lost his faith in his sort of mid-adult life, and he himself was a bit of a polymath, an astronomer, and was really interested in the sciences. And so it's a fascinating thing to sort of set the journey of people. Well, obviously, the transcendentals goes back thousands and thousands of years,
Yeah.
but in contemporary first sort of phases of industrial society and the way science really came into challenging the faith traditions of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it feels that this is a thread which is obviously a continuous thread throughout
Yeah.
human history, and that has been alive, and there have been sort of key moments where one part of the transcendentals has suddenly had a burst of progress.
Yeah.
And so with
Just to stop
yes,
you there, John.
sure, please.
And the transcendentals are the good, the true, and the beautiful. How did that term? Do you know how that terminology came about? Where how that was ascribed, or
Well, yes, because the um, earliest history, yes. I do have it actually on my Tyler.world art website,
okay, yeah,
potted history of the transcendentals.
yeah.
And but I mean, it goes back
Because we
to
know,
the Greek.
I think more commonly people with some knowledge of literature
Mm,
might relate it to the Emerson and Thoreau and that whole group that they're transcendental authors. They're known for it, but I'm not so
mm.
sure it's an East often uses an Eastern terminology. So I'm kind of curious how
Yes,
you're ascribing that to the good, the true, and the beautiful. So
well, in terms of the history, it goes even further back to Plato, or
Plato, yeah, Plato,
yes.
I know, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
So they
And
originated with the good, the true, and the beautiful. Originated with Plato.
exactly.
Yeah,
And to, I guess, define them, they were seen as irreducible dimensions. So necessarily, they were mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, and mutually exclusive.
yeah, yeah,
And Stephen Gould called them sort of magistra.
yeah.
Science and religion are
Non-overlapping magisteria.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. But obviously, in Stephen Gould's quote, he's missing art.
yeah. Oh,
And
okay, yeah, yeah.
so the
So I was asking you about the to explain the transcendentals. You gave the history of your family and the pre-Raphaelites being one of the examples of people of a group that fought, you could say, or strived to bring uh, beauty and goodness back into
yes,
consciousness, you could say.
exactly, yes. So again, coming to a sense-making term,
Yeah,
what it still feels very powerful for me is that the uh, the science, faith, and art are polarities in
yeah,
our human condition,
yeah,
and the vitality is how we move between them, how they
yeah,
actually make up a whole.
yeah,
And so this is where, with my endeavor 5 years ago to really commit to an art practice, was to really sort of complete the balance.
yeah,
And art is certainly a polarity with regards to science in terms of art is a way of being.
yeah.
And so I've been wanting to be faithful to that endeavor. Maybe you can hear some thunder right here.
I saw a flash
Some
behind you.
Atlantic,
Yeah,
yes, talking earlier of Atlantic storms coming in. And so it's been a wonderful guide for me to actually sort of point out in many ways well, the map is not the territory, obviously, in
Yeah,
Nickel
yeah,
terms, but
yeah,
the map certainly was extremely useful to point out with my professional identity and with my
yeah,
education that it was so much about the um, sort of the scientific inquiry, but the artistic dimension is one of being. And I mean, I can give you a very quick insight to how that really manifested itself because
yeah,
I was working in storytelling in organizations, gathering stories and then sharing these stories and seeing patterns in these stories. But in some ways, reaching the I was after 10 years of working in organizational development, I was feeling less nourished. And I was also putting a lot of pressure on myself to sort of be the organizational development expert consultant.
yeah, yeah,
And I came across a portrait filming practice by Nick Askew. And I
mm,
did a 1 day training with him in London
yeah,
in 2024. Sorry, 2019, so just before COVID. And it was how to show up behind the camera, filming somebody in black and white, but as the witness behind the camera, not doing anything or saying anything.
right.
And I could just be myself and magic would happen.
Oh, so that's where you're witnessing video on YouTube. That's what it originated out of.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And so I could sort of go down this road of really embracing the uncertainty and the silence and the open-eyed witnessing of people in front of my camera
yeah,
as an artist. And so yes, now I have over 70 portraits and I can I'm using AI to look at patterns in these uh, portraits, but to, I guess, just sort of um, circle around my own endeavors between the science and then the art. But then there is also, I'm looking at how the creative experience relates to a lot of faith traditions
yeah,
and how a lot of the language between contemplative traditions overlap with the experience, the creative experience, the creative art.
yeah,
And that also includes the journey of the ego
yeah.
and you had an amazing conversation with Ova Pomeroy at
Oh, yeah,
Presencing Institute.
yeah,
And it felt like I was able to, through again, sort of the cartography of the arts and the wording of the art, I could live the beauty, the aesthetic beauty of ego destruction in the creative
yeah,
experience and even the ego kind of annihilation in terms of just doing nothing and saying nothing behind the camera.
yeah, yeah,
But yet magic would always happen.
yeah.
And so I'm afraid this again, yeah, very, very long exploration. Maybe you could help tie me down to your
Yeah,
original
yeah, yeah.
question.
Well, yeah, I think I was asking you about how reweaving or weaving back the notion of the good and the beautiful into developmental sense making, and you were just um, um, referring to art. So I want to kind of ad lib from there because this is
Mm,
before we even began the conversation. If we For me, I often long for more of the sacred and the beautiful in art. So there's
mm,
something also maybe similar to what your ancestor attempted. You're taking up the mantle of I'd say, revivifying art away from the abstract and bringing sort of what's inspired and driven art has been the sacred and the beautiful since before the Enlightenment. So I'd love to hear more of your take on that as an artist, also as a complexity scientist, as it were.
Mm. Yes, thank you. Yes. Well, I mean, it would be really nice to sort of in some ways trace these connecting points in multiple directions because
Yeah,
you bring in the word sacred.
yeah, yeah,
And obviously, there's, I mean, there's more, even more dialogue around, even in organizational development, about embracing spiritual development, inner development, and um, uh, yes, the sort of the fabric, human fabric, collective that comes through various rituals.
yeah,
And so I have been going really quite deep into, yes, the relationship between rituals and art.
yeah.
There's a well, I'm a very long-term project is working on an interfaith art project,
Okay.
and so I feel that yes, art is a way into the sacred that is an alternative, a complementary alternative to the uh, traditions. I have a brother who's 10 years older than me who's been an ordained Buddhist order member for 35 years.
Oh,
Been a
wow.
big influence on me.
Yeah,
But I kind of cycled around because my mother was a devout Catholic.
right.
And I'm finding that in many ways, yes, art is able to offer a tremendously rich language. So if
Yeah,
we gather all the narratives of artists and put them together, you see incredibly powerful common patterns,
yeah,
which are all described really relating to a spiritual journey. And so I feel for our modern times, this is a way, art is a doorway through to the sacred,
yeah,
is very accessible
yeah,
and can be, an n equals one personal experiment.
yeah,
Now, having said that, actually, one slight tangent, but I think is kind of an important critique. You have a lot of interest in abundance and the manifestation sort of ideas of uh, if you are vibrating yourself at a high level of abundance,
yeah,
then you will receive from the field and from source also a great deal of abundance. And you know that is the experiment that I found that the more creative you are, the more ideas come. It really is sort of
yeah,
like an
yeah,
um, bottomless well of possibilities.
yeah,
And that I can, almost imagine myself 90 years old, only just sort of feeling that I'm just beginning on this
yeah,
journey.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but though there's an important book called The Gift by Lewis Hyde, who
Right.
talks about, in some ways, yes, the sort of the anthropological interpretation of religious and sacred artifacts going back 2,000 years. And there was an important notion in society of offering beautiful craft works of sacred objects from community to community.
Yeah,
But the gift, so art can be seen as a gift, but it's important to, and I'm trying to sort of work on myself, my own sort of personal development, which is engaging in an artistic um, commitment, but with no expectation of any return.
yeah, yeah,
And I think it's quite a good experiment to hold that there is an irony that yes, when you let go of your expectations, then there are some amazing surprises. But
yeah,
art, I wanted to also just sort of mention in terms of many ways the sort of the sacredness is that there is a sacrificial nature
yeah,
to offering yourself and not expecting material return, even if
yeah.
it is even if it is indirect. Um,
Well, it's a sort of, I think that actually kind of um, expresses the sort of the ubiquity of the artistic impulse in many people that may not be known for their art, but they're driven to express and create, and
Yes.
don't know why, but they give to that gift their own
Mm.
gift, and many are not recognized. But also, on the other hand, it's a counter corrective to the marketifization and objectification and
Yes.
commercialization of basically everything
Yes.
that a authentic developmental or spiritual process requires letting go.
Mm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I would like to sort of evoke, as you mentioned earlier, that coming back to the sacredness, that is a necessarily sacred journey to work through the dissonance, because the undoing of myself over the last 5 years has been constant battles, the excruciating process of going to my garden shed and trying to create something.
Your man
Or,
cave.
yes, exactly, yes. Or stepping out and doing some land art,
Yeah.
or stepping out and doing a sort of an ecstatic dance ritual on the beach. And it is a continuous process of working through, in many ways, this sort of excruciating, well, is this worth anything? Is anybody going to see this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Does it have any point to
Yeah.
it? What exactly am I doing?
Yeah.
And there has to be a faith that is underlying, is there deep down. So that's a constant exploration as to how I can remind myself. You forget, and then you remind yourself, and you forget. And I filmed a wonderful American musician, East Forest, who talks about this cosmic peekaboo, that even he
Yeah.
is a very accomplished performing musician, and he's a very spiritual seeker as well, and has done a collaboration with Ram Dass, and does meditative large gatherings with his music. He talks about how he forgets that he's able to do this, and then
Yeah.
rediscovers, oh my God, yes, there's the magic. So anyhow,
Yeah.
it is a constant movement.
I think it also, I've written an article about um, existential trust. Essentially, if you go through the process that you're describing, and your encumbrances become transparent to you, then it's
Mm.
possibility to have a deeper trust in the life process and the creative process,
Yes,
because that urge comes from somewhere more deeper, primal, and ever present. So
indeed, indeed.
I loved your statement, and maybe that's a good place to call the conversation to a close. Any last words you'd like to share, John, with the audience? About what you're doing next, or how encapsulate the conversation, or what you're most interested in before we close.
Well, I guess it's a quote from David White, just to pick up on that very last
Yeah,
topic, which is, "To whom am I beautiful as I fall?"
yeah,
And as a sort of just a sort of an image, I remember walking through the forest and looking at decaying um, trees that have fallen down, and autumn leaves.
yeah,
So that's a sort of a mantra
yeah,
which guides me, and the aesthetic of the decay, destruction, disintegration.
yeah.
And so, yes, being with that is, I guess, is an invitation. Scary, but a real invitation I'd like to close on.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, John. It's been a real pleasure. I hope everybody that listens gets as much pleasure and enjoyment out of the conversation. So I'm going to switch off right now.
Thank you, Dave.